Thank you.
Oh, we're getting all the important days.
Okay. As the clock is ticking, we'll get started. Happy Rosh Chodesh, everybody. So I first want to start with a general introduction about this month. That's what the sheet is about the general introduction. That the Rebbe has a name for this month. He refers to it by two names. One is, he calls it the Hasidic month, and the other is the Chodesh HaGeula, the month of redemption. And the reason is because there are a number of things that happen in this month that are part of the development of Hasidus and the Hasidic movement, major events. And also there are a number of things that specifically have to do with redemption. And that's what the sheet is about. I'll go over it briefly. First, we'll start with Geula, that this month is a month that stands out in the sense that it's a month related to Geula. First of all, we have Hanukkah. We know there are two major Yom Tovim, other than those which are in the Torah itself, and that's Hanukkah and Purim. So Hanukkah was a time when the Jews were being persecuted by the Greeks, and then eventually we had the miracle of Hanukkah, and we gained our freedom and our independence. And that was in the month of Kislev, this month, the 25th day of the month. Another day that's very significant in terms of Geula is number 7 on the list, the 19th of Kislev. No, not number 7, number 8. No, not number 8, number 9, sorry. Number 9, the 19th and 20th of Kislev in the year 1798. And we'll learn more about it as we get closer to that date. That day, the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad, was arrested by the Tsar's government. And not just arrested, but his life was in danger. And it was miraculously, he was saved. And that was on the 19th and the 20th of Kislev. After that, just 2 years later, he was arrested again. Again, there were false accusations filed against him. He was arrested a second time. And again, miraculously, he was saved. So it's another Hasidic Yontif. And that's the 27th and the 29th of Kislev. I wrote next to it because that's how we refer to it. The third, when things happen on Hanukkah, the days are identified by the candle. So either it's the third candle, the fifth, and actually there were 2 days involved, the third day and the 5th day of Hanukkah involved in his redemption. And number 5 is also a day of redemption, and that's 1826. The second Rebbe Chabad was also arrested because there were false accusations filed against him. And again, miraculously, he was saved and released from jail. And the day was Yud Kislev. So you'll notice that these are all dates, major events of redemption, and they all happen to be in the month of Kislev. In addition to that, there are other dates. Number 3, which is the 9th of Kislev. That's the birthday of the second Rebbe of Chabad, the Mittler Rebbe. And number 4 is exactly on the same day, 54 years later, he was nostalgic, he passed. And that was something very unique. And again, as we get closer to that date, we'll talk more about it, because this is something which we find by selected tzaddikim, that their birthday and their day of passing was on the same day. And what the Gemara says, this represents the idea that just like their days chronologically were perfect, began and ended on the same day, perfect circle, their lives spiritually were also perfect. Like Moshe Rabbeinu was one of those tzaddikim that passed away and was born on the exact same day, the 7th of Adar. Then the 14th of Kislev is the wedding date of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin. which is the day that, in a sense, the Rebbe became the son-in-law of the previous Rebbe, which ultimately led to the Rebbe taking on the position of leadership. So that's a very significant date for us on the calendar. The 19th of Kislev, which is number 7, that's the day that the Maggid Mezrich, the Maggid Mezrich is the second leader of the Hasidic movement. The first was the Baal Shem Tov, the second was the Maggid Mezrich, and after the second leader, that's when the students of the Maggid spread out, and each one became a leader and teacher of Hasidus in different parts of Europe. And that's when all the different branches of Hasidus began to spread out. Also a subject which we'll talk about later in more detail. But the day the Maggid had passed away was on 19th of Kislev, 26 years before the Alter Rebbe had his miraculous release and liberation from jail. And in fact, before he passed away, he held the Alter Rebbe's hand and he told him this day, which was the 19th of Kislev, is a Yantav day for both of us. And 26 years later, the Alter Rebbe was released from jail on that day. Number 8, the 20th of Kislev. So we know that there's really nothing more central to Chassidus than the book of Tanya. Tanya was the first book of Chassidus that was written. And this is the most basic, fundamental book of Chassidus, and everything else in Chassidus is sort of based on it. And when was the Tanya written? When was it printed, rather? On the 20th of Kislev, 1796. And from that point on, it was printed hundreds of times, actually a few thousand times, and it was reprinted and spread throughout the world. So this is a little bit of a general description of this month. In addition to that, we have today's day, Rosh Chodesh Kislev. And that's what we'll talk about now. What happened on Rosh Chodesh Kislev? So there's a big difference between what happened on this day, which is today, Rosh Chodesh Kislev, and all the other dates that I mentioned. They're all major dates, and they're all fundamental things happened and central things happened in terms of the development of Chassidus. But the difference is some of them happened in 1772, and this happened in 1798. This happened in 1800. But the number one on the list, because it's chronologically the first, is very different because it's something that happened in our lifetime and we actually witnessed it, we experienced it, we went through it. So I want to go over a little bit what that is. So Rosh Chodesh Kislev was the day that in 1977, the Rebbe on Simchas Torah Shmini Atzeres, which was the 8th day of Sukkot, but it's Shmini Atzeres, a separate yontiv in itself. And in Chabad, we have hakafas, we have the dancing that night. And during the dancing, in the middle of the dancing, the Rebbe had a heart attack. And I'll give you a little bit of details. It was actually a very, very severe, massive heart attack. And the fact that the Rebbe recovered was miraculous. The date of Rosh Chodesh Kislev, why was this designated as the date of recovery? Because I guess when a person, God forbid, is in such a condition and they go to the hospital and the ICU, when is the date of recovery? Once the doctors say you can now go home and you're on your own and you no longer have to be constantly under the watchful eyes of the doctors, that means that the person, that was a turning point in the person's healing, the person's recovery. So Rosh Chodesh Kislev was the day that the Rebbe went home. But he didn't go home from a hospital. He went home from 770. So let me explain what that means. So again, it was the middle of Hakafa, middle of the dancing. It was the 4th Hakafa. There were thousands of people in 770. And I was, of course, there together with everybody else and looking at the Rebbe. The Rebbe would stand up front and he would lead the dancing and the singing from his place up front. And suddenly, I'm looking at the Rebbe, and suddenly the Rebbe's face turns white. Never again should I ever see anything like that, but just like this wall, white, as if someone just took a window shade, a white window shade, and wrote it down. The Rebbe turned around. He held on to the stender that he was next to, sat down, and of course the Rebbe's secretaries ran over. They saw the Rebbe's not feeling well. There were some doctors in the crowd. They wanted the Rebbe to drink some water. He didn't want to drink. It was sukkah. You only eat and drink in the sukkah, and you don't eat and drink before Kiddush. So the Rebbe didn't drink anything. Not only that, the Rebbe wanted to finish the hakafas. At that point, the Rebbe didn't allow any of the doctors to examine him. And when the Rebbe did hakafas, means he himself was dancing with his brother-in-law, going down staircase. I can guarantee you the Rebbe knew very well what it means when a person has a heart attack and what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. But nevertheless, that's what the Rebbe did. He went down the stairs, went to the middle of the shul, and did the dancing. But at that point, the shul was practically empty. Everyone went out of the shul because the doctor said the place is jammed with thousands of people. There's no air here. The Rebbe needs air. And of course, as soon as we heard that, everyone ran out. Even though everybody was very eager and curious to know what's going on, what's happening. But once we heard that people have to empty the room for the Rebbe's health, so of course everyone went out, except for a few smart Alex, naturally. You always have some of those. And the Rebbe danced with his brother-in-law, then went up to his room and went to the sukkah to make Kiddush. And again, they tried to, as the Rebbe, if he would go see a doctor, the first one to make Kiddush. At that point, someone also ran to the Rebbe's home, President Street, and told the Rebbitzin what had happened, and she came from her house also to the sukkah. To us, this is a big shock because the Rebbe was physically very strong. The things the Rebbe did are things that people 30, 40 years younger would find it very difficult to do. And in that sense, we find that it was very different than other Rebbes of Chabad. Like the second Rebbe, the Mittel Rebbe, passed away at the age 54. He had a weak heart. He had a condition with his lungs. There were a number of times that he fainted. The Rebbe Maharash, the fourth Rebbe of Chabad, passed away at age 48. And he was physically had health conditions. The Rebbe Rashab, when he was in his 30s, he was so sick that the doctors thought that this would be it. He actually wrote a will. Then he lived many years later. And again, a second time, he was so sick that he thought that this would be it. And he was ready to give over the leadership to his son. And he lived another 20-something years. But all these years, he was weak. The previous Rebbe went through very difficult times in Russia, in the Russian jails. And you've probably seen videos when the previous Rebbe came to America, he was only 60 years old, and he was already in a wheelchair because he was physically broken. Our Rebbe was physically very strong. He never, ever missed a day. You know, the other Rebbes, even the Rebbes of Chabad, who are tzaddikim, purely spiritual, there would be times in the year where they would pick themselves up, go somewhere to the country area, away from the normal routine, just physically, health-wise, to relax a little bit. Of course, the Rebbe never relaxed, but relaxing from some of the things that he did on a regular basis. The Rebbe never did that. He came to some 70 every single day, more or less the same time, 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning. He left at night, late at night, went home one time during the day. 3 times a week, the Rebbe would meet with people on a one-on-one basis that could go to 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, depending on how many people were there. And this happened on a regular basis every day, not missing a day. In fact, the Rebbitzin wanted so much for the Rebbe just to get out of the city and change the air a little bit that she asked the people who ran the camp here in upstate New York during the summer, they should beg the Rebbe to come visit the children. And actually it succeeded. The Rebbe went to see the children. And that was where he had a chance to sort of leave the city, change the atmosphere for a few hours. They did a second time and a third time. When he asked the Rebbe for a fourth time, the Rebbe said he still didn't make up all the lost time from those previous years, and he's not going again. That was it. So for us, we saw the Rebbe like so strong, like a giant. And then when this happened, it was pretty much of a shock for everybody. And after the Rebbe made Kiddush and he went to his room, Then the Rebbe allowed the doctors to come in and examine him. And that's when they more or less confirmed that the Rebbe had suffered a heart attack. Of course, whoever knew a cardiologist, a friend, or someone that was their personal doctor contacted them. This is at night and late at night, and asked them to maybe come to 770 to treat the Rebbe. Because the Rebbe said he refuses to go to the hospital. If there are doctors, they should come here. He's not going to the hospital. So naturally, when the doctors came and they examined the Rebbe, they saw that this was a heart attack, not a joke. And a few doctors that did come said that the Rebbe must go to a hospital. There's no way that he can stay here. And the Rebbe said that he is not going to a hospital. So some of the doctors just left. They said they can't take responsibility. This is unheard of. And they left 770. And everyone tried different ways because Chassid is supposed to be concerned about the Rebbe's health. The Rebbe had his reasons why he didn't want to go to the hospital, but we want the Rebbe to be healthy. So people, the secretaries, other people tried to speak to the Rebbe that he should go to the hospital, he should agree. But didn't really work. So when the Rebbitzin was there, they tried to convince the Rebbitzin that she should convince the Rebbe he should go to the hospital. In fact, someone told me that I think he was standing there, or the Rebbitzin repeated to him later, that the doctor said to the Rebbitzin that the Rebbe's condition is very serious, very severe, and God forbid, something might happen any moment. And you're the only one that can give us, actually what happened was they gave the Rebbe an injection. When a person, God forbid, has a heart attack, they give an injection that puts the person to sleep so the heart could relax. Usually people can sleep for 15, 16 hours with this. So when the Rebbe was sleeping, they thought this would be the time to take the Rebbe to the hospital because he's not conscious, he's not awake. But they had to get permission from a family member, which was the Rebbitzin. Thank you. And they said to the Rebbitzin that you're the only one that can give us permission right now. And if anything happens, you should know you'll be guilty. Imagine to say such words to the Rebbitzin. She was very shook up when they said that. And she said, let me think for a moment. She turned around, she faced the wall. And a few minutes later, she turned around and said to them, I never did anything other than what my husband wants. And I'm not going to do it now either. He wants to be here, he's staying here. By the way, when they give that injection, which is a very strong injection of whatever they give, people sleep for, I think I heard 16 hours. The Rebbe slept for 4 hours. And the doctors were shocked. When they told the Rebbe that he slept only for 4 hours, she said, 4 hours? He never slept so much in his life. And that was the difference. 5 o'clock in the morning, the Rebbe had another heart attack. And that was really a massive, massive heart attack. And someone contacted a doctor that lived in Chicago. His name was Dr. Weiss. I see that online. He was speaking or will be speaking, giving over a little bit of what he saw and what he witnessed. But he was a religious person and he had a connection to Chabad. And he said that he's willing to come to New York and to treat the Rebbe. He was not just a cardiologist, he was the head of a department in cardiology in Chicago in the hospital, on the condition that they bring to 770 all the equipment that they have in an ICU unit in the hospital. If they do that, he's willing to treat the Rebbe and just honor the Rebbe's will to stay in 770. And he said that within 24 hours, they had everything that you have in an ICU unit in a regular hospital. When he came, he told the story later that the condition of the Rebbe was so frightening, he really didn't think that according to the natural order, it just didn't look like the ending would be positive. And in his words, he said, I know the Rebbe performed many miracles. In my mind, this would probably be the biggest miracle that he ever performed when he saw what was going on. And this Dr. Weiss became the Rebbe's doctor. In fact, he didn't go home for quite a while. He stayed in Kern Heights, stayed in 770, and he was on top of things until the Rebbe told him that, okay, by now he could leave. And other doctors were there under his supervision. But all this time, one of the things that he said, he once spoke actually at a dinner of our school, he was honored, And he said that he treats, as a doctor, he meets a lot of people that are celebrities, people that are leaders of communities, leaders of countries. And he found an interesting thing that all these people that have these high positions and leadership positions, but then when they're sick and he's treating them as a patient, they're just like everybody else, the normal fears, and they feel weak and vulnerable, and they're just human. I mean, that's a human being. So with the Rebbe, he found the opposite. The more he got to know the Rebbe, and the closer he got, the bigger it became. He gave the analogy of a mountain. When you see the mountain from the distance, it's huge. As you get closer and closer, and you look up at the mountain, it's much, much bigger than what you saw when you're looking at it from the distance. That's the way he felt about the Rebbe. So when he said that all along, most people that have had an attack like the Rebbe had are either totally unconscious, and if they are conscious, they're very weak. They can hardly think straight. In this case, the Rebbe was giving him ideas of what he could do. And he said in certain things, the Rebbe was light years ahead of medicine, things that he only found in libraries that wrote about research. In fact, some of those things that they didn't have then, they have now. I know one of the things that was written up was there was a doctor that came from Boston. He was considered the biggest cardiologist in the United States of America. And because he's related to a certain Lubavitch family, he agreed to come to Crown Heights and to see the Rebbe. This was later, not when the crisis was on. He came later, and he visited the Rebbe. And someone wrote this up. He said that he was related to the person who drove him to the airport. And on the way, they were talking about his visit to the Rebbe. And he told the Rebbe that 75% of the heart is not functioning, only 25%, and you have to get to learn how to work with it. And the Rebbe said, why can't they get to see that the 74% should be back to functioning? And he said, it's impossible. I think the analogy he gave is like rubber that stretches, but then once you stretch it to a point that it's overstretched, that's it. You can't get it back to be the kind of rubber that it was before. And the Rebbe disagreed with him. Some 20-something years later, in the United States of America, which now I guess it must be part of the regular knowledge, but then it was revolutionary, that there is a way of bringing back that the part of the heart that was damaged by the heart attack could be refreshed, could be, could recover. And these are the kind of things that people witnessed. The Rebbe in his room had a minyan, so they continued with the davening. And when the Yom Tov is over, usually we have a big Farbrengen. So, of course, it wasn't possible to have a Farbrengen. But the Rebbe said that they should set up the table, set up the chair. And the Rebbe asked the doctor, when they draw blood, the syringe gets full of blood, what is it that brings in the blood? Is it the needle, or is it the vacuum that brings in the blood? So the doctor said, it's the vacuum. When there's a vacuum, that draws out the blood. So he says, so give over to the Hasidim, that when there's a vacuum, ultimately, it brings something new that wasn't there before. So even though the chair is empty, and we don't see the Rebbe sitting there, there's a vacuum. We should know that ultimately this will only not only bring the health back the way it was before, but even more than before. And what happened was the Rebbe spoke from his room. Again, God forbid, no one should know, but anyone who has a heart attack and ICU, they're not even supposed to be speaking. Just speaking is stress on the heart. This was less than 40 hours later. I think with a heart patient, they usually wait at least 72 hours. And the Rebbe said he wants to speak to the Hasidim. He'll speak from his room on a microphone, and everybody could hear. The doctors were totally against it. And they finally agreed that he'll speak for 5 minutes. So they gave the Rebbe the microphone, and now the whole world knew, and the whole world was hooked up, not just Crown Heights. And the Rebbe began to speak. He spoke for 20 minutes. And Baruch Hashem, the doctors didn't interrupt him. They said they were monitoring the machines. And as long as they didn't see anything out of the ordinary, they let the Rebbe speak. But one of the most incredible things were that with everything going on, the Rebbe did exactly what he teaches us to do. As much as humanly possible, it did not give substance to the illness. The Rebbe didn't even use the term illness or heart condition or heart attack. So the first words as he began speaking was, usually this Farbrengen, this is my words, this Farbrengen is usually before Yom Tov ends, before sundown, everybody would wash, start the meal, and it would go on for 6 hours. That was the usual word. Over here, that everyone wanted to speak on the microphone. So first you had to end the Chag, end the Yom Tov. Now, daven Ma'ariv, and after that you could speak on the microphone. So the first words were, for various reasons, this Farbrengen is taking place over the air, over the microphone. And as a result of that, we can include not only the people that are local, but all the people around the world could be united. In other words, immediately speak about what's the benefit that comes out of the fact that it's not the regular time, and the Rebbe didn't say because of an illness, because of a sickness, due to a specific reason, which means the Rebbe did not and doesn't want to, and always advises us not to give any substance to the condition. And the Rebbe's approach being positive, because the Rebbe, after Yom Tov was over, asked for all the letters that accumulated in the mail. And of course, I said, Rebbe, you have to understand your condition. You just had a massive heart attack. You have to relax, give it a few days. Later, we'll give you all the letters. And the Rebbe said, no, people need answers. He has to answer them now, not later. They have a crisis. I have to tell them what to do. And after a lot of convincing, the Rebbe convinced the doctors to give him the letters, which that's what happened. And one of the doctors said to the Rebbe, do you realize that, I think he said, in 75% of the cases, this heart attack happens again? Like, you have to be careful. The Rebbe didn't respond. So the Rebbe, did you hear what I said? The Rebbe said, I heard what you said. You said that in 25% of the cases, it does not happen again. Which is the Rebbe's way of focusing on the positive, not to focus on the negative. And they did give the Rebbe the letters. All the guests that came for the Yom Tov had the opportunity to pass by the Rebbe's room, and the Rebbe gave them a bracha. So basically, the Rebbe started as much as humanly possible to do things, go back to doing what he used to do, but it was a gradual process. And also when they were in 770, naturally with Simchas Torah, so people were dancing. The doctors wanted to ask everyone to leave this shul, and nobody should be there because the noise is disturbing. And the Rebbe's response was that this noise is not disturbing, it's sweet music to my ears, and he wanted them to be singing there. And in fact, the people who were dancing were following the Rebbe's approach, which is to be positive, to think positive. If you think positive, be positive. First, they were singing a regular nigun, but with different words. The words were, the Rebbe should be healthy, the Rebbe should be well. In Yiddish, said, the Rebbe soll sein gesund. And after that, somehow the words changed. So now the Rebbe should be healthy, but the Rebbe is healthy. And that's how they sang the nigun until the Rebbe actually became healthy and went back to the things that he did before. But it's not that he went back to the things he did before. After this time period, slowly but surely, the Rebbe started to do things in a way which is even more than what he did before. To give you one example, the dollars on Sunday. The dollars on Sunday started in the early 1980s. This happened in 1977. The dollars on Sunday means the Rebbe himself opened a new door, that every Sunday he would be sitting there, standing there, and people would come by, and he would give them $1 and listen to everybody's request, give them brachas, and stand on his feet for many hours. After that, the Rebbe would go to the Ohel, and physically, just physically, this is something that should be extremely draining. Draining because you're standing on your feet for so many hours. Draining because your head is going back and forth giving the dollars, and draining because you're listening to people's pain and suffering. And we know the Rebbe took everything very much to heart when he heard things, and having to invest himself whenever the people's lives and their suffering. And yet the Rebbe opened that door, and we know that every Sunday thousands of people went by. This didn't happen in the 1970s. Didn't happen in the 1960s. This only happened in the 1980s, which is after all this. So actually, in certain ways, the Rebbe started certain campaigns and started certain things which were global much more than before. So one of the things which we learn about in Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe was arrested, the Mittel Rebbe was arrested, the previous Rebbe was arrested. In all these arrests, after they were out of jail, not only that they were able to continue what they did before, but they actually did more than they ever did before, because the whole purpose of anything that happens, which is blocking us and challenging us and getting in the way, the real purpose is not only to test us, but it's actually to propel and give us the ability to do more than what we did before. When you study Chassidus, you become familiar with this concept. So with the Alter Rebbe, after he was released from jail, he began to reveal Chassidus on a whole new level like never before. The previous Rebbe, after he was released from jail, he began to reveal Chassidus and teach Chassidus and spread Chassidus globally, which was never there before. And with the Rebbe, we also see the Rebbe's activities are much more than before. And we can perhaps say that the real emphasis on Mashiach and on the fact that the world is ready for Mashiach and the imminence of Mashiach, it all began a few short years after this incident. And that whole year, the Rebbe would not go downstairs, because walking downstairs and upstairs on Shabbos is a stress in the heart. So the Rebbe spoke from his room after Shabbos was over, and Hasidim and people around the world were able to listen through a hookup. And the first time the Rebbe came downstairs to have a Farbrengen publicly was actually Rosh Chodesh Kislev, the 19th day of Kislev, which is one of the dates I mentioned here before. And then on Hanukkah, the 8th day of Hanukkah, everyone who was going on with their business as usual suddenly heard that the Rebbe is making a Farbrengen in the middle of the day. Everybody was shocked. Farbrengen in the middle of the day on Hanukkah. Never happened before. Naturally, everybody came running to 770. And I happened to be there just at the time when it was happening, so I didn't have to come running. And everybody was wondering what it's all about. So we find not only is it Farbrengen, but the Rebbe wants everybody to wash on hamoitzi, on bread. So everybody washed on the bread. And later it became clear that the Rebbe was making a Sudas Heidah, which means when a person goes through a dangerous situation and Hashem helps them and they're saved, the life is saved, we have to show gratitude to Hashem. And one of the ways of showing gratitude is by making a Suda, a meal, a feast, where you're celebrating and you're thanking Hashem for the miracle. So the Rebbe chose that day to make his Sudas Heidah, his Thanksgiving Suda. And the Rebbe explained the connection because it happened to him on the 8th day of Sukkot. And Hanukkah, this was the 8th day of Hanukkah. And then the Rebbe went and brought sources in Gemara and also in Chassidus that the 8th day of Hanukkah, the 8th day of Sukkot are actually connected. And that was the day that the Rebbe celebrated then. The reason why we celebrated on today, not on the 8th day of Hanukkah, I'm not sure exactly how that happened, but I guess everyone felt the day the Rebbe came home, the Rebbe went home, that was really the day that the Rebbe's recovery began. And as a result of that, this became the day designated, and the Rebbe approved it. This should become the day designated to celebrate the Rebbe's recovery. I just want to say that there's a lot of more details that we can talk about this. But one of the things that was seen then at the time was Hasidim, their relationship to the Rebbe is twofold. Number one, the Rebbe is a teacher. The Rebbe guides us, the Rebbe educates us, the Rebbe teaches us, the Rebbe inspires us. In addition to that, the relationship between a chassid and a Rebbe is really like a child to a father, and the Rebbe relates to us like a father to a child. There are hundreds of stories. Today you can see so much of them on GEM. People tell their personal stories of how much the Rebbe was involved in their personal life, and how the Rebbe went out of his way to find out what was going on in someone's life and to help the person. People that were shocked that the Rebbe even knew that something was going on in their lives. So it was a relationship of love, and there is a relationship of love. In fact, there's places in Chassidus where it talks about that to some extent, the greatest love that exists is the love between a chassid and a Rebbe and a chassid. That's what you saw then. When the Rebbe was not well, the outpour of love that the chassidim around the world had for the Rebbe, davening for him, and not only davening, but also doing what he wanted, which is not to be crying, not to be sitting and moping, but to do more Torah, more mitzvahs, more mivtzayim, more things, to be besimcha, to think positive. They did that out of love for the Rebbe. In fact, someone told me that he heard murmuring from other Jewish people that they said this whole thing with the Rebbe having a heart attack, the Hasidim made it up, and they just fabricated the story. Why did they say that? He said, I went to 770. I don't see anybody saying Tehillim. I don't see people crying. I mean, the Rebbe, they're so involved with the Rebbe, and everybody's going on with life as usual. The real truth is because that was the Rebbe's instructions, and that's how the Rebbe tells us to live. Think positive, it'll be positive. But from the outside, it looked like, how could it be that the Rebbe is in his room with all these wires and machines, and he just had this massive heart attack, and the Hasidim, who everyone knows their devotion and loyalty to the Rebbe, are just like going around business as usual. So these people came to the conclusion, probably the Rebbe needed a little break, a little vacation. So they fabricated the story, everybody should stay away, and he got his vacation. That's what he said. But the truth is, this was an incredible thing that we saw. People can hardly do this with little things. The Rebbe did this with a massive heart attack. Lichatchila ariber, just to go above it, don't give it any substance, don't let it get to you, move on to do what you have to do. And the Rebbe sort of walked through that path, and he gave us the strength to follow that same kind of approach. But what we saw then was the love, the Rebbitzin. With that night when the Rebbe went home in 770, he was dancing and singing and Farbrengen all night long. It looked like Simchas Torah, it looked like Yud Beis Tammuz, it looked like Yud Tes Kislev, whatever you want. So the Rebbitzin said that she does not remember such rejoicing, such celebration amongst Hasidim since the day that her father went out of jail in Yud Beis Tammuz in 1927. So this is a little bit of an insight of what happened on that day, and we can sit and talk here for hours, but we decided to try not to interrupt with the regular routine of the learning. So right now we have the class in Gemara to bring everybody back down to earth. And the inspiration should last for the entire month. It's going to be a very inspiring month. The Hasidic month and the month of Geula.
Amen. Thank you.
You're welcome. I forgot to drink my tea. Sorry, Adina.